Welcome back, Heather. I am so excited to have you with us today, and I'm really excited about this topic because we are going to be diving into something that we need to know for our kids.
Yes, I'm so happy to be here. And this is a subject that's very dear to me.
Yeah. And I love, as a homeschool mom and a faith and family blogger, I think you're like one of the perfect people to be coming in and sharing this topic with us. I think it's super important. We are going to be diving into helping kids through fear. I know Heather's been on a couple times already. We've talked about embracing the new beginnings. We've talked about facing anxieties as moms and women. But today we're going to dive into this a little bit about facing fears with kids and how we can help them grow, how we can help them find peace and embrace truth and overcome these fears. I think that a lot, and for me, I've noticed when I allow my kids to watch something that's a little bit scarier, or read something or whatever it is, they can mess with their fear zone. So I think it's really, really important, especially as moms, to be careful what we're letting our kids see or do or hear, because it does, I mean, it honestly does mess with our mind. And I obviously, red hot mindset, I'm all about the mind and how important it is to control it. Because God did say we need to focus on what is lovely, and what is true, and what is admirable, and what is right, right? And so I think this topic matters a lot to me for those reasons. And I know I've seen fear. I mean, even just the other night, my I think we watched like a ghost Christmas movie or something. It was a fine, fun Hallmark Christmas movie, but my son woke up with a nightmare. And it wasn't scary. It wasn't a scary movie, but he woke up with a nightmare, and I'm like, oh, well, interesting, right? And so I've seen it in my own kids. Have you seen fear well up in your own kids, Heather?
I have seen fear, and I think that oftentimes we think our kids are viewing things the same that way that we are, but their minds are immature and they're young and they don't analyze things the same way that we do. And when we see a situation, we can look at it for what it is, but they can't. They just don't have that maturity yet. And even as teenagers, teenagers are often allowed and expected to watch more adult shows, but they still do not have that maturity to handle those same situations that are seen in those movies, and so what goes around in their heads is different than what goes around in our heads. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, because helping your kids overcome their fears is similar to you overcoming your own, but it has quite a bit of a different twist to it.
Yeah, you're right. Because, and I think sometimes we think, well, they need to be responsible enough, or they need the maturity, but the developing minds, I mean, they're really developing up until 12, and then at 12 they have the preteen emotional state where they think that they're already adults, but their mind is not there yet. And I think fear is real right now. I think 2020 proved that. The message of 2020 was fear. If you watched the news, if you were on social media, if you were out in public, the message was fear. And honestly, when I
It
go into
was.
the store and I see people with masks on, anxiety and fear well up in me. And
It's
that's something
scary, isn't it?
it is. Or when I run, like, I run, and it used to be a bad thing if somebody was masked when you're running by them. And
Sure.
that actually has been a huge thing. Cause I'm like, this isn't normal. And I shouldn't have to run. I'm already running alone in fear in a way, because when you're running by yourself, there's a lot more risks and dangers. And in as a woman community of runners, we know that. But then you have these people where you can't even see their faces or their expressions, and you're like, oh my gosh. So for me, that's been scary. And then, just I'm thinking about what do kids even, I'm not in their, I want to be in their mind right now to see what do they think when they see this going on,
Right.
or when they hear the fear tactics that are on commercials or on TV and all of that. So what I want to know is, why do you think that changing this narrative for our kids matters?
So let me just tell you a little story about my son. He is 13 years old now, and he was 10 when we lost our daughter, Rebecca. And those two were very, very close. They were 17 months apart. And ever since then, he has been afraid of dying. And it was about 2 months ago, I had fallen asleep on the couch. I do that regularly, and he all of a sudden he woke me up, and he's like, "Mom, I'm shaking." I'm like, "Well, what's wrong?" He's like, "I don't know. I'm just shaking." And right away, I recognized that he was having a panic attack. And he's like, "And I'm all stuffy, and I'm sick." And I'm like, "You're afraid you have COVID, aren't you?" And he was. And it actually created that fear, created a panic attack. And if you've ever had, an attack like that, it's very trying on you, both emotionally and physically. And, so I just cuddled with him really tight. And I tell you, it's heartbreaking to hold your child when they are so afraid of something that they are literally shaking. And so I thought to myself, well, we need to deal with this more openly. I need to do something so that to prevent another attack. And I at first I wasn't really sure how to go about it, because I'm not exactly in his head. And to simply tell him, "Oh, you're not going to die from COVID," it doesn't rationalize his fear. And we sometimes, as adults, we forget that fears aren't always rational. You can't just, make them go away by common sense. So in their heads, it's very real. Their danger that is causing them to spool up is very, very real. And even though to us it might not be, we need to talk to them as if it is, so that because they can't dismiss it themselves. You just telling them, "Oh, that's not going to happen," it doesn't cause them to dismiss it.
Hmm, that's so true. I never even thought about that. The fact that, because I do that sometimes, or we brush it off, right? We'll go, "Oh, it'll be fine. You'll be fine. You're not sick. You're not this,"
Right.
you know?
There's no reason to be afraid of the dark. There's no monsters under your bed.
Right, because that fear is there. And though it's irrational, we all have irrational fears, but
We
though there
do.
is, we have to kind of embrace it as if it's real in a way. And so I'm excited to hear what you have to say about this. When it comes to helping our kids with fear, what's the first tip that you have?
My first tip would be well, actually, can I back up just for a second first? I think that we have to give our kids the strategies to deal with those fears. So that would bring me into my tips. But first of all, think about not necessarily dismissing their fears altogether, but teaching them how to handle those fears, because that is a skill that they're going to need for the rest of their lives. Because even if you dismiss their fear and they get over their fear of the dark or heights or, the scary neighbor, they're still going to face fears as adults, intruders, or, even fears like losing a job or, things like that. So by teaching them how to deal with their fears rather than just addressing the fear itself, you're setting them up for more success later on in dealing with those strong emotions. So my first point would be to teach your kids to go to God. Of course, we want to be the protector of our children, and we want to make everything right for them, and we want to be their safe place, which we are. But we can't protect them forever. And even things, even if we're doing the very best that we can, we can't always keep them from getting cancer, or we can't keep other kids from bullying them. And so we need to teach them to turn to God in their fear, because He's the only one who can take that away from them. And He's the only one who can give them the courage to face those fears and who can give them peace and joy.
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes we forget that too, because um, sometimes our initial thought isn't to, and we talked about this actually in probably both the last episodes you and I did, is really starting with God. We need to start with prayer, or we need to start by tuning into Him. But sometimes with our kids, we're like, "No, we want you to come to us first. We need you.
Right.
We want to help. We want to be your healer. We want to do all these things." But yeah, we're not going to be that person forever. And God is, because
Right.
He loves our kids more than we do, which I don't know how that's possible, because I love my kids.
Right.
But He cares way more for them, and He has them in the palm of His hand. And if we learn how to direct them to Him, then their life is going to have way more joy and way more constant and more, um, you know, this, I mean, when it comes to fear, it's like if they knew to go to him right away, like sometimes I am good at it. And when my kids have nightmares, I say, just say Jesus,
Right.
just the name,
Right.
just the name is going to
Right.
help
Just
with the
say it out loud.
I
Right.
think one of our top priorities as parents is to raise our kids up in the Lord and to help them understand what
Right.
having that relationship means. And honestly, I mean, you're a homeschool mom, I'm a homeschool mom. One of my things that I did in the beginning when I started homeschooling was I wrote down the top 10 things I wanted my kids to know before they graduated. And honestly, when I got through that top 10, their math wasn't on there. Reading I
Right.
mean, the subjects weren't on there. It was things like how to have a relationship with God and how to budget your money and all those kinds of things. But I think that's what being a parent and discipling our kids is about.
Exactly.
I think one of the things uh, Christy Wright, an author and speaker, says that you don't have to guard your heart with God.
Right.
I think that's so true. And I think that's something that we need to teach our kids. We don't have to guard ourselves with him. We can tell him anything. He already knows
Right.
anyway. He knows all your deepest thoughts. He knows everything, negative and good. And so we don't have to guard our heart with him. He'll never hurt us. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's true. Point our kids to God and he will help them overcome that fear. So what would you say the second thing is for us to do with them?
I think we need to learn to be honest with our kids. Oftentimes, we hide situations from our kids because we don't want them to be afraid. But our kids are much more insightful than we realize, and they are taking in everything that goes on around them. And you don't want your kids taking in what's going on around them and interpreting it themselves. They need you to be honest with them. And of course, you want to be age appropriate. You don't want to sit your 3-year-old down and try to explain to them about death. But but you want to be honest with them, because if they hear it from you, it's going to be less scary than if they hear it from friends at school or the neighbor or even the news. I remember when my oldest son, started to read, and he would pick up a newspaper and then he'd be reading the headlines of the newspaper. And there's a lot of stuff in that newspaper. A lot of bad things happen and stuff that I wouldn't have told him about. So they're going to get this information somewhere. You want it to come from you because you want to be sure that they're perceiving it correctly and that you're helping them through those feelings. And I think those feelings for them will build up in a negative way until you shed the light of truth on it. So do that first. Be honest with your kids first. Explain to them how you're feeling, too. You could even say there's nothing wrong with admitting to your children that I'm afraid. I'm afraid and I'm going to God with it. Let's all pray together because this is something serious that's happening in our family or in the world around us. So sometimes when we try to shelter our kids, we actually do more harm than good. And so I think, though, I have been accused of sheltering my kids in the past, but it's because most of what they view comes from me. I don't want them watching the news. If I feel something is going on in the world that they need to know about it, I'll discuss it with them to make sure that they have a proper view of it. And so that will help with their fears as well.
Yeah, I love that. I think open to communication is huge
It
for
is.
us. And I think sometimes it's hard for us to be open because we don't really know what to share or how much to share. But I think you're right. Just even admitting, or even just when we say we're sorry if we mess
Yeah.
up, and being available to say, you know what, I need you to forgive me. Because honestly, we're not above our kids that we don't need to ask for forgiveness. I think I probably mentioned
Right.
today. But and that would help with their fears of having to do those kinds of things. And I think just when you're willing to have those open conversations with them at younger ages, it'll keep them open and wanting to come to
Yes.
you if they know what your responses are going to be, right?
Exactly.
Because
Exactly.
they don't care what they don't care what you say, they care what you do. And if they know that you're going to fly off the handle if they tell you something, then they're never
Right.
going to come to you. And I think in this time and this day and age, especially in the last couple of years, mental health has risen for kids, and
Right.
communication is so needed. They need to know that it's a safe place for them to come. especially if they have those irrational fears, that they're not just going to get turned away or been or told that it doesn't matter, that
Right.
we are going to be there with them to try and help them through it and point them to God. And so being honest, I think, is a huge, huge tip. Um, and then as far as helping them overcome fears, what's your third and final tip for us today?
And I kind of touched on this just a minute ago. I think that we need to be a light to them and teach them how to deal with their fears. So, like I said about, telling them, I'm afraid and this is what I'm going to do. And like you said about coming to them and apologizing, or telling them, I messed up, I need your forgiveness. Or they heard you and your husband fighting. I have before told my kids, I was wrong, I said some nasty things to your dad, that was wrong, I apologized to him. It's the same as when you guys fight. And so when we make these things real and teach them what to do with these strong feelings, teach them what to do with these actions that they might otherwise be afraid of. Kids are afraid to disappoint us. And when we're honest, and I don't want you to go and tell them your life story if it's been super negative, but just be real. Be an example of how to deal with fear. And I think us as moms, we set the mood of the house. And so if we're stressed out and afraid, they're going to be stressed out and afraid as well. And even if we're afraid and, they see us working through those fears, that just teaches them how to work through those fears themselves.
I love that. I think that as moms, we have the power. We
We do.
have that power to set the atmosphere. And you're right. I think if we're in chaos, our whole family's in chaos. And
Yes.
so that does come with starting with us too, and saying, okay, I'm going to learn how to be peaceful. I'm going to learn how to overcome my fear, because then I can teach them I can model for them what that looks like.
Exactly.
And modeling for them is being honest and I messed up again. Sorry, forgive me.
Right.
This is what I'm scared, and this is what I'm going to do to work through that. And
Exactly.
and you know what? And I think modeling it shows that those fears come up and they rise again and again and again. And
Right.
it's okay to deal with them every time. And it's okay to
Exactly.
say, I am scared, but I'm willing to do something about it. Yeah. So this is good. So our 3 tips today, as you're helping your kids work through their fears, is to point them to God as your peace giver. Point them to God. Help them see how to communicate with Him. Number 2 is to be honest with them and have that open communication, age appropriate, but be honest. And number 3 is to be the light in your family. Set the atmosphere for your household. I love these. I think that I love these Thursdays because I feel like they're tangible things that we can do each week, and we can see the results in them if we
Yes.
apply them, and easy to apply. Sometimes really hard to do, but it is easy to apply if we're intentional about it. And that's what this is all about. It's all about intentional living and taking these Thursday tidbits and doing something with them. So I hope you guys were blessed today. Heather, thank you so much for joining me. This was I loved this topic. I think this is so important to teach our kids.
Thank you.